Hi there, and welcome to a new episode of Extreme Banding, the slow YouTube camera channel dealing with various photographic nightmares. I am living in one of them right now, December in the north of Sweden. Weather is so-so, and the sun never rises. There's no time or place for photography, so what can you do? Think about which all-mechanical rangefinder camera with a cost below 1,000 euros you would like to use for the rest of your life, perhaps.
Leotax was a company that started making Leica-inspired rangefinder cameras in the late 1930s. To avoid Leica patents, they had to make some changes in the design, but after the war, they could copy as freely as everyone else. You can read more about this on the excellent page leicacopiesjapan.com. When they could copy, Leotax made pretty standard Leica II inspired copies thereafter. But gradually they evolved the design, pretty carefully though. In 1958 they released the Leotax FV, and in 1959 this Leotax T2L or Elite, which is the same camera but with 1/500 of a second as top speed instead of 1,000 of a second, and without self-timer. And this camera has several thoughtful upgrades compared to the Leica III. It maintains the basic form, even though the camera has increased in width to 140 mm. The height is 74 mm and the bottom plate is for some reason 32 mm. So wider than the Barnack Leicas, but the grip in itself is still the standard bottom loading 30 mm. So it still has, that thin feel. It weighs 477 grams. It's about the size of a Fed 2, but since it's a bottom loader, a bit thinner. Fed 2, the first version, that is. And compared to the Barnack Leica, as you can see, it is bigger, but not dramatically so. The camera is very nice to hold, and the slow speed dial does not get in the way of your fingers in the same way as on the Leicas or on this Soki 3, for example. The reason is simply that they moved the shutter button from the back to the front of the camera. So with this position you kinda want to have your finger right here, but when you have it here it's more relaxing to keep your middle finger below this dial. They also added a lever wind, which, well, it may not be up to the standard of a Leica M or a Minolta Super A, but it is easily at the level of a Canon, such as the Canon P6L, VL or what have you. And it is very easy to get that with your thumb. You never have to struggle to find it. Another small, quite significant thing is this small rewind crank added to the knob. I mean, it's not crucial, but it is very practical. So, ergonomics are great, so is the winding. What about the viewfinder? Well, Leotax gradually evolved this, first having the same style of, the original style of viewfinder, two separate windows, and then they moved them closer together, and finally they made this, change the look of the viewfinder part.
The rangefinder of the Leotax, 1.5 times magnification. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to calibrate this, so this is what you get. But then you have the viewfinder of the Leotax, 0.58 times magnification and a frame for 50 mm field of view. It is not very big, so you don't see much around the frame. They made the viewfinder very blue to increase contrast of the frame, and thus it is quite a bit darker than the original Leica ones that is as bright as real life almost. But I would say that this frame, even though you don't see much around it, is quite inspiring when it comes to framing. If they would have made the viewfinder a bit bigger so you could see even more around it, it would have been better, but as it is now, it is an improvement over the original but it's not totally clear cut. I would say it's quite nice viewfinder, not that inspiring in terms of, you know, colors since it's so blue, but that frame is very visible, and you can see there are parallax markings at least, and you can switch between very quickly.
What are the drawbacks? Well, compared to a Barnack, it is a bit bigger and slightly heavier, but still a bit smaller and significantly lighter than the Canons and Leica M's. This is a much heavier camera than this, and as you can see, it is a bit bigger. It's difficult for me to show you, but they are as wide as one another, but this one is lower. As I said before, it's about the same size as the first version of the Fed 2, but nicer to grip. Bottom loading is of course an issue, but something you have to live with if you want a thinner camera. We can compare shutter sounds between these two cameras. I don't know if you can hear it, but the shutter sound of the Leotax is very subtle, a bit more silent than the Canon P. You can check this Leica II here. It's not Minolta 35 class perhaps. I have to lift them up from the table to not spread the sound there. Wow, the Minolta 35 is, well, so silent. For me, the size advantage and rangefinder magnification, having a 1:1 finder of the Leica II Model D, are significant factors. But the viewfinder, winding and rewinding of the Leotax speaks in its favor. The main downside to the Leotax is that it is uncommon. I could not adjust the rangefinder the usual way in this camera, and that makes me suspect that something could be broken. If something is broken in a Barnack Leica, there are a lot of spare parts from other cameras, but in a Leotax T2L I'm not that sure. It could also be something simple, but I would have to open it up then to investigate this further. So Leotax, pressured by the SLR revolution and outmarketed by Canon when it came to rangefinders. Leotax, just like Barnack, went bankrupt in 1959, which is a bit of a shame, because I am not sure I would prefer the T2L over a Barnack, even if it is close. But I'm quite sure I would prefer it over any of the Canons. The best Japanese mechanical rangefinder camera, well, from those made in the 50s. I haven't tried all of them, but this is, this far, clearly one of my favorites.